Democrats are selling their latest budget bill as a way to fight inflation. Many economists and government think tanks are now signing off on it. Not everyone is buying it, though. Here's NTD's Melina Wisecup with more.
What originally started as a $3.5 trillion budget plan, then cut down to $1.75 trillion, is now about $400 billion worth of investments. Democrats have rebranded and renamed what was originally President Biden's Build Back Better bill. Democrats now calling it the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. It's on track to pass the Senate this week. Here's Senate Leader Chuck Schumer on the Senate floor today expressing the need to pass this new budget plan.
This bill will, quote, fight inflation and will lower costs for American families while setting the stage for strong, stable, and broadly shared long-term economic growth.
Healthcare is a large portion of where Democrats aim to lower costs, investing $64 billion to extend the Affordable Care Act and capping the price of prescription drugs. Vance Ginn, who previously worked on economic policy for the White House, explains why it could attract the opposite results as intended.
What they assume to go into, the Affordable Care Act and allow for these extensions, these subsidies to go through, that would potentially only reduce the prices of health care. And I question whether that would even be the case, because really you're just subsidizing increasing demand in the healthcare marketplace without providing additional supply. So the prices are likely to go up. That's a bad scenario. But that's only one price. Inflation is really where all prices are going up. And that happens when Congress spends too much money, increases the debt, and then the Federal Reserve prints too much money. And that's what we've seen over the last couple of years.
To offset the costs of these investments, the budget bill relies on projections that in 10 years, the government will be able to rake in $700 billion in tax revenue. However, revenue projections are highly volatile, especially in times like now when the economy is slowing.
That slows down tax receipts, tax collections that are coming into the government, because the people are making as much in income and things of that nature. But if you looked at the full 10 years, like they're budgeting in for the tax hikes and everything else, that would bring down this debt reduction from about $300 billion to only $90 billion, which is we had a $90 billion deficit just last month. So this is talking about 10 years. This is not much of a debt reduction, and I think it's based on a rosy scenario that ultimately isn't going to happen, and it's going to hurt the economy and hurt Americans in the process.
And as of today, the Senate parliamentarian, that is the Senate Rules Advisor, is still reviewing the details in this bill, making sure it meets all the standards for reconciliation. While that process is still ongoing, and we have yet to hear from a key centrist Democrat, Kyrsten Sinema from Arizona, about whether or not she would support this bill, Senate Leader Chuck Schumer today expressed full confidence that this bill will pass this week. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Melina Wisecup, NTD News.
With multiple states having primary elections, election integrity is in the spotlight yet again. I chatted with Congresswoman Claudia Tenney recently about her own election and how she started the Election Integrity Caucus in Congress.
Claudia Tenney, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Great to be on.
Congresswoman, I want to ask you about your most recent election. You had a very interesting race, to put it mildly, when it comes to election integrity. If you could remind us how your race actually played out that night and what had you most concerned about the result?
Yeah, my election was very extraordinary because I was winning by 28,422 votes, because we know the numbers now. It took 100 days of counting in court. It was all done under the guidance of a Supreme Court justice in upstate New York. And it took 100 days of staring down Mark Elias and his attempts to overturn our election. I think the election could be characterized by the pandemic and the fact that Governor Cuomo at the time changed the election rules over 100 times, making it almost impossible for our boards of elections to really manage this election with high turnout in a presidential election. First time we had early voting, allowing no excuse absentee voting, providing an online database where people could actually register to vote. They were vote harvesting that way without securing the identity of the people that were asking for votes, without really verifying. No signature requirement, all required by New York's Constitution. And all these rules were put on the wayside to enhance the ability of vote harvesting. And then those laws continue to be in place. And then, incredibly, In my election, as Mark Elias continued to try to uncover votes, we found all kinds of irregularities, votes found in drawers, votes found on shelves, and this is, weeks and even months after the election. And finally, in January of 2021, we were actually registering voters, registering them to vote and count those votes in the 2020 election, well after Election Day. So it was a huge amount of irregularities. We were able to pull it out by 109 votes. And that's what caused me to form the Election Integrity Caucus, just to find out what's really going on, to ensure that we have free and fair elections. We secure the private right to vote, maintain one citizen, one vote, easier to vote and harder to cheat. Because my dream is to make sure every legal citizen who's entitled to vote exercises that right as a self-governing constitutional republic. It is just essential that people understand that we are not an authoritarian regime. We are driven by the people, and their right to vote is really their greatest expression of self-governance.
So is there, or what is the single biggest issue that you think is facing, or biggest challenge, our election system?
Right now, it is the interference of private money that was through Mark Zuckerberg, the Facebook billionaire, who put over $419 or so million into really targeted zones, into swing state areas, and almost a little over 92% only Democrat areas, where they were trying to prime the pump. Some of it was legal, and that's probably the biggest concern that many of us had. So I introduced a bill called the Stop Zuckerbucks Act. This money was filtered through 501c3, so it was using our federal tax protection system, just stating that we can no longer do this. We can't have this shield. A number of states have passed this, including Florida and numerous others, and also a number of states, including Florida, which Governor Ron DeSantis has been a leader on this, is criminalized vote harvesting and the attempt to undermine our election system. Unfortunately, we've won on Zuckerbucks because Mark Zuckerberg and others have decided not to intervene in our elections, but President Joe Biden signed an executive order, which I think is unconstitutional, taking $1 billion in taxpayer dollars and putting that money into, again, giving federal agencies like HUD, the Small Business Administration, and inviting agencies which have nothing to do with elections to be the centers for where we can collect votes, secure votes, and also register voters. This should be the sole job of experts and people who are trained, who understand the importance of the integrity of elections in the boards of elections, in the states, in the counties, and places where we know that our right to vote is going to be secured.
You mentioned a few of the states that have passed some election reform. Another one of those states, I believe, is Georgia. And one of the main things in their bill was chain of custody. It sounds like chain of custody was an issue in your election, potentially. What would you like to see in regard to that?
Right. Chain of custody is another way of saying we need to make sure that every citizen that votes in the United States, their vote is private, that the government doesn't know how you vote, because once the government knows how you vote, that opens the door to what we see in the Soviet Union, China, communist regimes, authoritarian regimes, is the government actually knows how you vote, and that's intimidation. And when the government can intimidate you and make you feel, geez, we gotta vote the way the dictator wants us to, or we're not going to get our benefits, or we're not going to get our freedom, or we're going to be sent to a gulag. That's why we have so many laws in place, is really because of that. Our founders saw this early on when the New York State government actually created Article 2, which covers elections. They knew how important it was not to have government officials and partisans being able to intimidate the voters and their right to vote freely, fairly, and securely, and privately. That's the real key issue there.
Congresswoman Claudia Tenney, thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
President Biden is appointing senior officials from FEMA and the CDC to deal with the country's monkeypox outbreak. The White House said FEMA and CDC officials will coordinate strategies and operations to combat the current monkeypox outbreak. Officials will also need to resolve vaccine supply and demand problems. There are currently over 5,800 monkeypox cases in the United States. The first case emerged in May. The disease is currently spreading predominantly in the homosexual community. White House medical advisor Dr. Anthony Fauci said he personally thinks, quote, "We're dealing with a really serious issue here," and that, quote, "there are a lot of unknowns." A U.S. district judge just handed down the longest sentence so far in connection with the January 6th Capitol breach. Guy Reffitt out of Texas got more than 7 years in prison for entering the Capitol building with a holstered handgun and body armor. According to prosecutors, Reffitt told members of a militia group that he planned to drag House Speaker Nancy Pelosi out of the Capitol building by her ankles. But his daughters said that he was not violent. His wife also said that January 6th protesters are being persecuted for their ideological beliefs.
And he went that day because the United States is the last great stand we have. And if we allow our country to keep being driven into the ground by the corrupt, evil politicians here in this city, then one day at your kitchen table, FBI is going to come in and tell you that you stood up at the school board meeting and you are now a domestic terrorist. So wake up, America.
Reffitt was the first person to go on trial for the January 6th Capitol breach.